This is a lot. This is maybe impossible.
Yeah. Well, this would be a rare situation where we end up having more time than we need if that turned out to be the case. So,
I think it's just fate speaking.
yeah. So just, I think everybody was in the room this morning when I reminded people that we had this scheduled and also reminded them that back in February, we had you all come in to brief us on the program and share some of the stories and talk about what you had been doing more recently in terms of looking at data. And I think we all agreed at the time it might be helpful to continue that conversation when we had more time. And here we are at the very end of the session. So I'm glad that it worked out. So I'll turn it right over to you then, Elizabeth, and get started.
Yeah, and I think we are very grateful that you're having us back in to have this conversation. And I think the timing is excellent. I was just sharing with Chair Durfee that many of our fiscal year 2025 grantees have just completed their final reports, so 14 of 17. And so the data the data that we will be able to share today, which is, I think personally, I find it much more helpful to look at rather than just lists of, data points, to actually look at some analyzed data. We wouldn't have been able to share in February because we updated the reporting in the fiscal year 2025 reporting. So the data that we're sharing today is going to be, it's like hot off the press. I would say this is initial analysis. But let me step back and say, we totally overhauled, really beginning in 2024, began the process of updating the program's roadmap and the way that we're measuring progress and the performance measures that we're looking at. And so that is the focus of today's conversation. The vision and the mission that's on this slide is very much grounded in the program statute. So the law that created the program, and it is very much the guiding force to how we're measuring the program's progress. And I think one thing that you will see today is that with the goal of supporting a resilient and sustainable farm, food, and forest economy in Vermont, we are not able to sum up progress on such a lofty goal with, one number. Like, we can't sum it up with one number. So you're going to see that we are collecting a true diversity of performance measures.
Representative Brian had a hand up.
Yeah, Elizabeth, just maybe you cover this in future slides, but since you talked about the calendar, in a year, can you just quickly give us a thumbnail of, like, if I'm Angel Sawmill, when would a applicant apply? When are you looking at awards, and when are they granted, and then sort of following right to get up where you are now?
Yeah, I think that's a great. So grant applications are due in the fall, late fall. Award decisions are going out, and it's slightly service provider grantees are slightly earlier. Business enhancement grantees are slightly later. But fall applications are going out, winter decisions are being made, and then by spring, projects should be off and running.
So when you apply, it's actually that same fiscal year you'll get your money?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and we were just saying that all of the grant funds for fiscal year 26 have been allocated, and all of those grant agreements are processed, and the projects are off and running.
And then a certain amount of follow-up is done in the next year.
So then, as far as all grantees, service provider, business enhancement, they all submit an interim report. Depending on that report, like, there might be a need for a check-in, either on the phone, face-to-face. And then final reports. And then following the final report is when we do the site visit. And so we end up, Claire and I try to do a lot of site visits in the summer because we're doing less like applicant support, a little bit less outreach, and less like processing of actual grant agreements. And it's a nice time to be out with grantees because they're doing, the projects are like for the projects, this summer we'll be visiting fiscal year 2025 projects. So those projects are all completed. It's really interesting because you can see the, if it's equipment or whatever in use. It's kind of.
Something you just said just triggered a question about the actual payment. So the applicant is awarded or they're informed in the spring sometime that they've.
Winter.
Winter, okay. Are you sending them a check right away or is it a reimbursement?
So this is I was mentioning that we have done a deep dive into equity and accessibility, really for throughout all of FY26, and we'll be rolling out some changes in FY27. But one of the strengths that was identified by grantees for the Working Lands program is that we are not all reimbursement based, and it is hugely appreciated by our grantees because with some grant programs, grantees are having to take out a loan. So doing a sort of a parallel process to take out a loan, paying interest on that loan to execute a grant funded project. But for us, we can pay, our typical payment plan is that grantees would receive 40% of their grant budget, of the grant funded budget, upon signing their grant agreement. So that allows them to, hit the ground running. And under some circumstances, so for example, if a grant is focused, for example, on buying like one large piece of equipment, and that often entails quite a large, the business is normally giving a down payment to the manufacturer and then, sometimes making one or two more payments. And if they can show a quote, for example, from a manufacturer with like a very up-to-date price, we are able to pay up to 90% of the grant funds upon signing the grant agreement. So there's a lot of flexibility there. The payment of 90% is very rare, but it has happened when it's like one big expenditure. And it's a real strength of the program. We've actually had other programs asked to meet with us to like better understand just like how we're doing that.
Just a quick follow-up on what you said. So just for clarity, you don't need a match, but sometimes matches come into the applications too?
Yeah, in fact, yes, there are many projects where the applicant is, the grant dollar amount is not sufficient, so additional funds are coming in, and those are also captured in the budget table. It's just no longer required, which was also identified as a real strength of the program in the equity and accessibility audit that we've been doing. And it's funny because those are also two, we've sort of been identifying, I guess what we're calling myths, like things about the program that people don't seem to understand that we really need to do a lot of like clear communications around. And those are actually two. A lot of people think that it's all reimbursement, and a lot of people think that there's still a match. And we were receiving critiques like it shouldn't be reimbursement, there shouldn't be a match requirement. And we're like, oh wow, like we actually aren't doing those things, but you just don't know that. So we're, that's part of the recommendations from the audit is just like putting out some of the common misunderstandings in really as many ways as possible.
Historically, those did exist or not? It's just a myth that,
The reimbursement has not existed in my tenure. And I think it shifted when the Agency of Agriculture shifted to deliverable-based payments is when I believe it shifted. And the match requirement changed 2 years ago.
All right, good. We should probably let you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I'm very happy to answer questions as we go. So I think these are the updated vision and mission, very much grounded in our statute and very much guiding how we're measuring progress. And because we have a very lofty mission, it's one of the reasons we're collecting such a diversity of data. And I think because we're going into a presentation that's data heavy, I wanted to remember to thank you for having grantees come in during the legislative session to tell their stories, because no amount of data will ever surpass, hearing from the grantees themselves, where they can explain, what impacts has the investment had on their business and their lives. So the new roadmap within the new roadmap, we've articulated 4 strategies. And these strategies very much represent the work that we're doing to advance the mission. The majority of our funding goes towards strategy 1, which is highlighted on this slide. And those are the metrics we're going to focus on today. And strategy 1 is the strategy that's related to our grant making with businesses. And we're happy to come back and talk about 2, 3, and 4, but I think this is actually going to be a pretty robust conversation just focusing on strategy 1 today. So there are 2 categories of metrics that we're collecting for the program, operational metrics and performance metrics. The operational metrics they're a broader summary of what the program does. So how much money we are getting out the door, who is it going to, and then these are the metrics that we are often analyzing by county, sector, grant year, and then business type. So actually we're breaking it down by many different defining factors of businesses. So like stage of business, size of business, focus of the business. Most of this data is collected in the application, and it is not measuring the impact of the investments. But it very much is measuring the impact of the beneficiary businesses on the landscape. And this slide captures data from the fiscal year 2025 business grantees. So this came from the application. Again, this is not measuring the impact of the funds invested. This is to capture, for us to be able to communicate with the public, and for you to be able to communicate with the public, like, wow, these businesses are having a really big impact on the landscape. So clearly important that we're, supporting them. So just in one fiscal year, we have 1,524 acres stewarded. We have $12,200,000 in annual sales. And this is coming from the 17 fiscal year 2025 businesses, 146 people employed. And the last data point here is it's a bit of an outlier actually, but I wanted to include it because it's another common myth that we've identified where people think that the same businesses are getting grants all the time, where, you know, that isn't the case. And in this fiscal year, 76% of the funds went to, you know, first-time grantees.
So this is,
These are operational, these are coming from this list.
in the one, for example, the 146 people employed, that is incremental employees that these businesses, the 17 businesses added as a result.
No. So this is
Started with.
This is what they started with. So we're gonna get to, let me actually just go. So we have operational metrics, which was, so these are what we're calling the operational metrics. And then we have our performance metrics. And the performance metrics, we're looking at this is where we are looking at the outcomes of the investment. And we are, based on the statute and based on program priorities, we are looking at these nine areas. So we are looking at overall business satisfaction, which includes like the business's own assessment on their outlook for their business. Income, jobs and labor efficiency, production, land, worker well-being, improved supply chain impact, improved climate adaptation, and improved engagement, equity, and equality. So those are the buckets within which we're collecting the performance metrics. And this is the data that we are collecting from businesses' final reports. There's something, oh yeah, I think, and the reason we're collecting such a diversity of data is because we believe that there really are a diversity of factors that are supporting the sustainability and viability of businesses. Like, again, like trying to sum up what we're doing with one number wouldn't capture what these grants are actually doing on the landscape. And it also would not be a sufficient measure because a lot of this is really for us, right? Some of it is for the external communication, but it's really for us to be able to say, are we successfully, you know, supporting the sustainability and resilience of farm, food, and forest economies in Vermont, which we can't look at one number and say, yes, we're being successful, you know, through our grant making. So that's why we're looking at, you know, this really pretty long list of impact areas.
John, do you have another question?
Yeah, just on your operational metrics, what does acres stewarded mean? You know, it's just interesting for what you're
Yeah.
saying now. It's like one specific piece of data.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, so for the operational, so this is the acre stewarded, you know, baseline prior to receiving funds. That's the operational metric. So that means, you know, the reason we didn't say acres farmed is because we're also serving forest businesses. So if loggers, you know, we basically ask them like, what is your approximate like number of acres that you're working, like logging on in a given year? And that's included in this to be inclusive of both ag and forest businesses.
Because I was wondering, say like Burt's Orchard, you know,
So if
got an award to buy a piece of equipment, but it only does, you know, blueberries or cherry trees or something, not the whole orchard. How does that metric show itself up?
So that would we would still ask Burt's Orchard, what is the total acreage that you're stewarding? Because we want to understand again, the impacts of these businesses on the landscape, not like the specific enterprise. Because for us, this is just, it gives a snapshot of like, oh yeah, this is why, like, this is why we want to support these businesses. They're doing a lot out there. They're employing people, they're selling a lot, they're, stewarding a lot of acres. Like, we're not talking about 2 acres and, $200,000 of sales. These are like, folks that are keeping the landscape working, right? I think trying to like speak to the types of businesses that are being supported, if that. But I did just to clarify though, for the actual performance metric, and we're gonna see this. This is where we capture the increased acres in production under the land. So that would be increased by the grant. Like by the grant funded activities. And for these metrics, which you're gonna see, there's basically also a question around, because we're measuring the change during the grant period. And there is a question that says, how much was the change that was impacted during the grant period related to the grant work? Because if we're saying, did you increase acreage during the grant period, it's totally plausible that they increased that acreage, not due to, the grant funded project, but due to something else. So we follow up each question with understanding how much that change is related to the grant work, which you're going to see actually in these, not in this specific one, but in the next. But yeah.
Representative Burt?
Yeah.
Do
you want me to go back?
To kind of, say, that, so if you've got to John's question of, something that affected just the blueberry patch and the production there, versus, like our farm is 500 acres total, a lot of it's sugaring operation. So the data you're saying would it reflect just the acreage that was directly impacted by the grant or the whole? For stewarding the land, I guess it's talking about.
Exactly,
Which
yeah.
makes sense, I mean, the whole farm is more.
So that's for the operational, but definitely if you applied for an improvement to your blueberry patch, or let's say an expansion, like, then what would be captured in the actual performance metrics, which is what we're gonna look at more today, would just be focused on the blueberry enterprise.
So,
Representative Steve?
Yeah, that really catchy well.
Yeah.
Clarifying their expansion, the merger of very, it's with a diversified farm with like sugar and yield crop.
Yeah, and I think,
You explain.
and I think, and again, so all of the slides moving forward are going to be focused on the initial analysis. It's incomplete, right? We still have 3 businesses that haven't submit their final reports from fiscal year 25. But we felt for today's conversation, it was going to be more helpful to have some analyzed data, even if it's not capturing all 17 business grantees. So this data is from the final reports of 14 business enhancement grantees who just completed their final reports. And yeah, captures the new performance measures and metrics that we are looking at. So we're going to go through each of those 9 areas and look at the data available. And I think this is where, the conversation begins, clarifying questions and, making sure that this data is going to be useful to your own, recommendations and storytelling with your colleagues. So the first impact area is business satisfaction. So 57% of the businesses improved their overall positive outlook on their business. 86% were satisfied or very satisfied with the outlook on their business after the grant. And 100% satisfied or very satisfied with the impact of their grant on their business. So this is, yeah, again, these are what we're looking at for the satisfaction outcomes. And I think the first is really, I mean, I think we sort of call it the vibe check of like, how are these businesses, like, are they feeling more confident about their businesses after this investment, right? Which feels very important to understand, like their own, positive outlook for their working land business. So of course, we'd love to see, I mean, so any questions on? So these are, these are the performance measures related to income. So 57% of the business grantees in 2025 increased their gross and net income through their grant funded project. This is now not if, Burt's Apples, increase their income, but the grant funded project was on the blueberries. This is the blueberries. This is like, did the investment help increase your gross and net income? So for 57%, and I guess it's also really important for me to say that we do not expect for businesses to have impacts in all of these areas. And it is one of the reasons that we diversified the priority impact areas, because we think that investing in worker well-being is very important to a business's long-term viability. And there are ways that you can link worker well-being to, increased output and therefore maybe increased income, but we're also capturing change. This was a decision we made to capture the change within the lifetime of the grant. So we are also aware that some of the actual outcomes take multiple years to actually come to fruition. But we just think that even though the numbers might be more inflated if we went back and tried to capture them in 2 years, which is what we did previously, we also knew that we would not get answers from all the businesses and it would be incomplete data. So we've made the conscious decision to collect and report on the data from the final report. So yes, the businesses are really, some of them are just starting to take advantage of the impacts of the project, but it's going to be 100% report rate, because the one thing we never do, we always hold 10% for your final report. Like, that's non-negotiable. And then 10 to 74% of grantees, that was the range of increase in gross income over the grant period. It's a big range. And 100% of the income increases were related to the grant work. So again, that's asking the grantee to clarify, okay, you had increased income, how much of it was related to the grant work? So in this case, 100%.
Elizabeth, I mean, it's really fascinating sort of digging into the data. Just like another example, say, I was just thinking of sugaring. So if the grant, say, bought a vacuum pump so you could do 1,000 more acres, it would show up on the acre, metric. But if you bought a RO, it might help your bottom line because you're using less diesel, for example, but it would show no increase in acres. Right. So just, I mean, both could completely change a business, to put it in the black, but they're different metrics though, in your narrative ultimately.
Exactly. And that's why, because originally the metrics were fully focused on increase in income, increase acreage and new jobs. And we didn't feel that those three metrics actually captured the range of outcomes and also didn't capture all the diverse factors that can allow a business to become more viable and sustainable, which is that's the program's.
I was thinking of it actually almost the exact same scenario where you might have somebody who's doesn't intend to expand their collection in number of taps, but they can cut their costs. And so they're not increasing gross income necessarily, but obviously
Maybe,
in the business.
and maybe, and the labor efficiency, yep. Let's actually look at some of the. Like my computer's frozen.
Just for the record, Trevor Long, Assistant Director of the Development Division at the Ag Agency. And, a talking point we often discuss internally too is sometimes these metrics are in tension with each other. So for a business, one project may be procuring a piece of equipment that can increase efficiency, which may decrease your labor needs, right? So if you're only measuring jobs added, then you're missing that story. So I think that's another important piece here too, is like really thinking about the breadth of what it means to be a viable business and how that impacts each different project, each business very differently. And then sometimes this tension that does exist. So we want to add jobs, yes, but it may not be the viable path for that business to bring on more employees. It may be trying to increase efficiency and throughput in order to increase their bottom line. So those just, I think, is underlying a lot of the kind of challenges of capturing the distillation of what this program is accomplishing. It is quite broad across so many different operations.
And you don't necessarily have an easy way to resolve those questions when there's conflict. It's not like, oh, we'll default to this one is the one. If there is a conflict, sometimes it might be for employees and other times it might be something else.
I sent you the link.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes increasing acreage is the right move for that business and that project. And sometimes, maybe selling off some acreage to focus more on a more profitable part of that enterprise is doing is the right towards viability. So again, I think it's trying to cast a very broad net and then really emphasize the kind of nuance and the impacts of the program.
If you need technical help,
Well, I think Claire's gonna pull it up. I don't know why my computer's frozen.
I think we've got, some of us have it on our own.
Yeah, we
screen,
have
so
it on
if you
our
want to,
devices.
Put it up.
Somebody else share it.
uh,
I can Doster when you can, but I can also.
I can, or do you wanna just follow along? Is it important for if there's people?
No,
listening at home?
No.
it's on our committee page, so I
Okay.
think anybody who's watching online, on Zoom, I'm sorry, on YouTube, or Zoom, can follow it.
It's okay.
If you want to keep going, yeah,
Okay.
well,
Well, Claire's pulling it up. Okay, great, thanks. Sorry about that. I don't know why.
you're on page 9 or
I think we're on
page 8.
slide 8. That was the income outcomes, but I think we can move on to slide 9. Which is talking about the labor outcomes. So this, again, these are the fiscal year 2025, the 14 projects that are completed. And again, focusing on grant impacts. So there were 8 jobs added. So that's getting to somebody's question about, well, how many, we saw 146 employees, but how many jobs were created through the fiscal year 25 investments? So that's 8 jobs. 100% of those jobs added were related to the grant work. And then also within the labor outcomes, and this was one of the new performance metrics, is increases in labor efficiency. Because we all know that finding people to employ is hard, and even harder is finding places for them to live. So if we're talking about working lands businesses viability, efficiency has become a really important metric. So 79% of grantees improved labor efficiency, which is pretty incredible with their grant, during the grant period. And 91% of those improvements were related to the grant work.
It might be the Wi-Fi, I'm still looking at.
Okay, so maybe it is.
I think we're doing just fine.
We're doing okay.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and
what page are you on?
so slide 9.
Slide.
Oh, because you have
I know, I just pulled it up.
the
I,
labor, yeah, you got it. Yeah, so any, questions or comments on the labor metrics?
Improved labor efficiency, and maybe, sorry if you covered that, but
What does that mean?
yeah, how do you calculate that?
So it's, and it is calculated, it's because it's very diverse for how, businesses might do that, but it's really hours saved is how most people are reporting that in their impacts. So for example, if a business was bottling maple syrup by hand, I'm making this as an example, and then they invest in a bottling equipment, and that saved them 15 hours, of labor a week, then they would report on saving 15 hours, of their labor per week. I think, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Nelson.
Think, the task I have at home right now, if I had a spray coop with 500-gallon tank and 45-foot booms. And now I go to a machine that has 90-foot booms, 1,000 gallons tank. I'm doing twice the acres at a much faster speed, creating great labor efficiency. And there's so many other, a rock rake. You go out and windrow your rocks instead of having 5 people walking over the land, picking them by hand. You windrow your rocks and use a skid steer and a bucket loader load that you're increasing your labor efficiency.
So does a 79%, this, and this slide, the figure 79%, does that mean that 79% of the businesses improve their efficiency,
Yeah.
or that there was?
So 79% improve their efficiency, not a 79% improvement, but a 79% of the businesses over the grant period improve their efficiency.
Thank you.
I was just thinking, the nature of farming and forestry operations is you never actually finish, so.
Yeah, exactly.
So when, I think what we heard with Freeverse Farm, gets a piece of equipment, and then that shifts the farmers, gives them those 15 hours to do something else, which is.
Expand, basically, in their
Exactly,
case,
yes.
yeah.
That's probably reflected in here too, that you didn't necessarily hire somebody, that you could be better at something else, you're just not getting marketing or.
And I think it is, that's why we do, and a lot of the metrics are related, and Freeverse is a good example. So they increased efficiency in harvesting, and then were able to add acreage. So they maybe didn't include, improve their work-life balance by doing that, but they improved output.
Oh, yeah.
I think they did improve. I think a lot of times also, because by increasing production, they are increasing their income, they're increasing their output there, which is all related to a better work experience. So, okay, so then the next impact area is production. And 71% of business grantees increased their production. That it was 10 to 24% increase in production was the most common reported increase. 40% increased their production by at least 25%. And 100% of the production increases were related to the grant funds, the grant project. And I think, I'm just, in future presentations, we've included some quotes on the side. But I think, examples are great, like examples from the fiscal year will be, I think, helpful. But yeah, any questions on, output?
It's good.
So this is the impact area, speaking to land. So 21% of grantees, so this is, lower than, some of the previous impact areas, but 21% of the FY 25 business grantees brought new acres into production. And it was 20 acres that were brought into production, and 100% of those acres brought into production were related to the grant funded work. So
I mean, it'd be interesting to know amongst the awardees, which of those even had this goal, if you had, what's happening within your, say, production area, because you're doing, wash and wrap type stuff and it made it more efficient, but increased acres was never your goal there. It was more efficiency within a business of where, right, expanding your strawberries or sugar bush or whatever was your goal, then that would be interesting what that percentage was.
like how many, it was based on like this was sort of an unexpected outcome, is what you're saying, like. How many-
Or even expected, like with this piece of equipment, I can expand, but a lot might be more about efficiency or bottom line, or we could, get more out of our employees or, better work environment, whatever that, and I had no goal of bringing new acres into production.
And I think that speaks again to, because in the application, this is the final report, this is the final outcomes. Applicants are asked to project what the impacts of the project will be. And that information is what's helping reviewers, along with, quite a bit of other information in the application, decide who to give grant funds to. And so it is very interesting, though, to see, because projections are challenging. And, it would be interesting to look at like projections versus, because we are reporting on final outcomes, not projections. So I'm just thinking now, like, oh, that would be interesting to see how those change. And I had one other. Oh yeah, just again, like, we don't expect that any business can actually have impact in all of the areas. Yeah, I think that's just, and we very clearly state that in the application. We don't want people to be creating impacts just to fill out more, impact areas. So these are the impacts for worker well-being. So 79% of grant-funded projects improved workplace safety and or workplace conditions. 100% of those improvements were due to the grant project. So it's like, this is the relationship in this data. 7% expanded, owner or employee benefits. And 100% of that expansion was due to the grant-funded activities. 21% implemented workforce development activities, which can be like trainings. And 66% of those activities were due to the grant, so a little lower relationship to the grant. 50% increased wages, and 86% of those increased wages were due to the grant.
What's an example of a workforce development activity that a grant recipient might have implemented?
Training, improve, like developing a like human resource like workbook for employees so that they better understand their their like the conditions under which they're working.
I think some of these might also, some of them might result from what you mentioned earlier, Representative O'Brien, of like the grant let us be more efficient in this area, so that we had time to train employees. Like we've seen that before, and this is an anecdotal example, not from this group of grantees, that we helped them purchase milking robots, and so the folks that were doing the milking can now train on more like specific like cow care activities. Which was like one example. So that wasn't that like the thing they did with the grant was a workforce development, but having the grant then enabled them to pursue these other things.
Having the time.
Yeah, and I think a big one too is with the equipment grants. Some of those, like that's a real like skill that the worker is getting trained on, depending on the type of equipment that's being purchased. So there's like a full training component to that.
And I think also for grantees that were like for the businesses that did hire new employees, like there's always quite a bit of workforce development training that has to happen with new employees. So they're, I would say, definitely being captured in this metric.
Just quickly, a metric outside of this, but that would be fascinating, would be just in general, say in those state dollars going towards economic development in say ACCD and other places in Vermont. It'd be fascinating to sort of put them up against these numbers and
Yes.
say like, these numbers are just through the roof compared to say, a certain amount of dollars to create a job or create a workplace, a safer workplace. Or that, it would just be interesting to see those. If other sort of agencies are doing the same data collection that you're doing here.
Be interesting to do a comparison. And we, and that's it is one of the beauties of, the tri-agency, like, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development is on the board, so we can ask if we have any of the overlapping. And then for climate adaptation, 50% of the grantees implemented climate adaptation initiatives, and 100% were related to the grant activities, the grant funded activities. So that is the last impact area for the business and for the business grantees. The next slide is actually just an update because we didn't have the data, the full data from the fiscal year because we hadn't finished making awards. So this is the program demand, where fiscal year, the funds available in that fiscal year, the funds requested, but the data that we pulled after our conversation in February was the high scoring requests, because I think somebody had asked the question here of like, well, what number of like what dollar number of the applications were really shovel ready. And not even maybe just shovel ready, but like actually high scoring. So these are applications that scored a 75 or above. So for fiscal year 26, this current fiscal year, we had $1 million. We had 6 million, so we had $1 million to grant, which we granted. We had $6 million in requests and $4,500,000 of those could have been funded had we had the $4,500,000.
Would have felt comfortable, and it was difficult to choose between.
Exactly, those were the high scoring requests, yeah. So, but I think this was, we wanted to offer this update because we didn't have because it was answering a question that was asked, that was data related. But I think, yeah, now is kind of time where we can go back to anything and talk about it or talk about like ways. Yeah.
But yeah, anybody have any thoughts or questions? I think that the point that John just made about having, back to the 20 acres, just for example,
Mhm.
that were added, being able to see, just using that category as an example, if you went back and said, how many acres did the 17 applicants project they were going to add? And did they hit that, or by how much did they miss that?
Mhm.
It might be, maybe that's would be more helpful for you internally than it would be for the legislature to know. But the other thing you said, John, that I thought this could be actually helpful, and I don't know how to make this happen quickly and easily, but the $1 million or the 2 million or 5 million, whatever it is that is requested for the program each year, is competing against a similar request in another part of government.
Can you go to the other side?
Yeah, being able to say, well, here's how we vet these, and we can be pretty confident that there'll be, a return somehow. And there isn't one number, as you keep saying, and
Mhm.
that's what makes it challenging. But being able to say, yeah, we can be pretty comfortable that we're going to see this kind of results from, increasing this program. How does that stack up and measure up against something else in another agency?
Mhm.
That feels like that would be, if we could get our hands around that, that would help with.
With your advocacy.
Yeah.
When Working Lands was created, what was the sort of target number? Was it 5 million a year that was going to be requested? It's way more than $1 million.
So we down.
Yeah, it was more, it's always been more than $1 million. And then for a few years during I don't know what we're calling it, the
ARPA funds.
ARPA funds, yeah, we actually reached that target. But, it only actually 1 year with a full 5 million, but yeah, we've never consistent, I mean, that would be the dream for the program. And efficiency wise, like I say this often, like we can move out 5 million about as efficiently as we can move out 1 million, because we're dealing with all the requests anyway and reviewing all of the applications and doing all of the applicant support. We just don't have the money to make the awards, and we have the
You demonstrated that, right? Because you were awarding a lot more a few years ago.
and when we have more funds, because we are able to offer those impact grants that are really looking to have that supply chain impact, the up to $250,000 grants. That's one of the reasons that the funds requested, goes way up, because the impact grant requests, add up very quickly. But if we whenever we go back to having more funds, which I'm confident will happen, you know, with that, we will bring that back because we felt that that was a very strong addition to the program to be able to make some of these larger dollar grants that were going to impact, you know, an entire supply chain, an entire sector, you know, really fill a gap for, an existing gap in the landscape. So that's things like distribution, aggregation, storage. But we don't do those when we have 1 million. For obvious reasons. We could give 4 grants.
So these were 14 of 17.
14.
From 2025,
Yeah.
FY 25. How many awards were there for FY 26?
18,
Similar, yeah,
So like, yeah.
yeah, maybe 19.
19, okay.
Yeah, John.
Is there a mechanism for philanthropic donations to this fund? If so, does that ever happen?
It has happened. And I would say, it's a very nascent conversation actually that we've been having internally. Vermont Ski has donated to the Working Lands Enterprise
Oh.
Initiative. And I think there could be appetite around, like, you know, the tourism industry benefits a lot from Vermont's working landscape. But I think there are sensitivities around competing for funds with other groups that we haven't talked to, NOFA or CAE, or, you know, to understand how they're doing their sort of philanthropic fundraising. Just to be careful not to step on their toes too much. But I think it's of interest to me. And I do think that there are groups that would give to this, like grant making directly to businesses that maybe are not giving to some of these other really important, you know, institutions like the food hubs, the CAE, NOFA, Intervale. But I think there's opportunity. I also believe that prior to my tenure, Whistle Pig gave a donation.
I think that's right, yeah, I think Ski Vermont is bigger than 2 precedents for that, so there is precedent. It's been a year or 2 since that.
And I think there was also a little bit of a, if we were to go that route, we would have to be very clear, like, what are we offering these businesses? Like, you know, they could be named in our impact report. But I think just expectations of what you're receiving in return. Because I think I had a conversation with one enterprise and they were interested in like coming with us to testify. And I was like, well, that seems a little.
For the exposure, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was, you know, but to me, like, if you can't offer that to 10 enterprises if they each give $5,000, like, so we just would have to develop a program for that, which is definitely feasible. And I think we can clearly recognize them and they can also use it in their own promotion for sure. And Vermont Ski specifically like to identify the grantee that they wanted their funds to go to, which was also feasible. The grantee would agree and then they could, you know, in their own social media say like, we're supporting this business to do this, or not in their own communications, not just social media.
Without, you know, violating any disclosures. We had someone talk about having goats go to graze a certain ski area
Yeah, trail.
terrain, which saved the energy and labor of mowing. You know, from any ecological or climate. Is that goat enterprise, you know, they're sort of mobile or nomadic.
We have had a goat.
Was that you or different?
That was not what
It wasn't a,
Dan Smith.
Yeah, Jay was the agri-tech.
It was some state funding, I think, for that a couple of years ago.
Okay.
Elizabeth, thank you.
We have had one application, they actually weren't successful. And it was because they actually had partially because they had grant funding from another source. So their level of need was just not as high. But they were applying for like the collars that allow the goats to actually,
Expensive.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, it was gonna be substantial, pretty substantial number of, goats being raised for market. But also being paid to, it was a dual market that this business was working with, which was interesting.
I just wanted to say how appreciative I am of, that you're doing this with data, and I wish whether it was JFO or the administration could develop metrics about sort of what we've been talking about here, because as a policy committee, when I look at like, well, we have 105 million we might send back for property tax relief on education, you're like, well, could you take that 5 million and maybe, put it into working lands? Because I data wise, economically, we get a lot more out of that, and we get, community and business resilience or viability, as opposed to what does 5 million look like when you return it, just as property tax relief.
Mm-hmm.
Be really interesting to look at that sort of impact.
Yeah, I want to appreciate what the suggestions you guys have today. It's certainly got my mind turning. I think our shop has invested more heavily in the ability to just work with data and analyze it. So we brought in some really skilled folks. Claire is eventually work, but we have another person who does, is able to just kind of level a lot of that up. We've also, Justin Kenny and the Chief Performance Office, they do this a little bit to try to coordinate big programs across the state around consistent metrics. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there to kind of work even more collaboratively and think about, some of the questions that you raised, Brian, around, what is the ROI and how do we think about really nuanced investments? I think the other piece too, which is Elizabeth's alluded to, it's just like the limitations around capturing data within a project period. When that investment may have a 10-year payback, may have a 15-year payback. I think in my fantasies, there's there's money for a longitudinal economic assessment, to like follow a handful of grantees for 10 years and really like get that sense of like, how did that play out? You had a $20,000 grant in 2026. What does that look like in 2036? What are those various impacts? So I think we're also really invested in this data piece and trying to kind of fill in the gaps and tell a broader and more nuanced story.
We have participated in the chief performance offices. I think they used to call it results-based accountability, now they call it performance-based metrics, I think. And we had submitted data annually that I think we're now shifting to like, this is the kind of data we'll be submitting to them, and that does get aggregated with other types of programs around the state and shared as the chief performance office that does that. But yeah, I don't know how much, my experience has been like, we very much have autonomy to choose what we're submitting to them, which I think is good because we can like know our programs and know what data is available. And I think if there were to be some kind of bigger picture economic analysis in terms of like dollar value of return, like we don't have like A, the knowledge, or like B, the like sort of technological skills to calculate that. But if that was to be like a state level effort,
It could be really
certainly
interesting,
participate,
actually.
but I think like
It was an effort
we don't
to
have that
compare.
capacity in our roles and trying to do other things. So that's why we're kind of sticking with what we have. But I think the chief performance office, I think is really trying to push towards what you're saying.
But especially a longitudinal, like that would be really interesting to see, like for some of like the programs that are stable, like what is the longitudinal return on investment, like comparison? I don't know if the, yeah, I don't know who could take that on, but.
We don't hear or know very much, I think, about the chief performance officer, or the office, and how big they do, how big they are.
Agency of administration, it's a 2-person staff. So they do a lot, and they advised us on this whole process of redeveloping our districts, and their whole job is they run trainings, all kinds of stuff in state government. Some of it metrics related, some of it's not. It's very much just around improving performance across the government and there's communities of practice for collaboration. But yeah, it's less on like prescriptive, like we're gonna do this for you, but more like we're supporting you. But yeah, I would.
But it was, they were very available for us to review what we were doing. And that was really pretty amazing. And I think that they're offering that similar service to other programs that are trying to improve their data collection and communication.
Good. All right, well, I think we should probably wrap up then. Thank you for coming over and making.
No, I mean, thank you all for, I mean, we are always very happy to come and talk with you all because we understand that you are telling this story for us. So anytime.
So
I'm glad it worked today.
we'll plan those of us who are here next year. Hopefully everybody will look to have you back in January.
We'll certainly have the full data then. We'll have the additional data from the 3 outlier grantees. Yeah.
Good. All right, thank you. So we're done, I think, we are done for now. I don't know that we're done for the day, so stay.
Depending on approach, right?
Yeah, depending.
So we
on-
might be called back.
We might come back in to do a straw poll or two.
Or do a huddle